India's Most Trusted Brand of the Year Awards 2024 with the first award category, which is Best UGC NET JRF English Coaching in Delhi by Vineet Pandey. It goes to Professor Vineet Pandey.
दिल्ली में सीएमपी द्वारा दूसरा अंतर्राष्ट्रीय सम्मेलन डॉक्टर दीक्षा त्रिपाठी ने थैनेटो पॉलिटिक्स पर चर्चा की।
Next up, we have Vaishali Ghalyan, an assistant professor of philosophy at Miranda House, University of Delhi. She is also a PhD research scholar in the Department of Philosophy at University of Delhi. She is a recipient of the 2024 Women Empowerment Award and the 2025 Education Excellence Award from IITM. And she is also the founder of Sukoon, a platform empowering over 500 young women through mental health and resilience initiative. Let us give him a warm welcome.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Vaishali Ghalyan, and I'm teaching in Miranda House College in Department of Philosophy. Well, first of all, thank you to the founder and the team CMP for choosing this very impactful topic, the topic of death. Why? Because society, people, academic circles, and the living ones are not very comfortable with death, the passing away, with letting go, and thus they don't talk about it. Why? Because death leads to despair, sadness, depression, anxious paranoia, and grief. All humans are searching for happiness, so they evade the concept, the discussions, and the people going through grief, the death of a loved one. Now, I am not an expert in the subject, so why am I here? I actually lost my father to medical negligence some time ago, so I myself had a fair share of my experience with death and with grief. Thus, I thought it's relevant to be here. Sometimes the most chilling stories are not about how people lived, but about how they died, or rather, how their deaths were managed. Last year, India witnessed two tragedies that shook our conscience. Recent one was the case of Manisha, a bright young student from Bhiwani, Haryana. She went missing one afternoon, and 2 days later, her body was found abandoned in the field. What followed was not closure, but confusion. 3 postmortems. First in Bhiwani, then in Rohtak, finally at AIIMS, Delhi. 3 different reports. No clear answers. Her parents waited, protested, pleaded, and still clarity was denied. Their daughter's body became less a daughter, more an object owned by the state, the institutions. And then the second one, of course, was the Kolkata case. A young doctor, only 31, raped and murdered in her own hospital where she was serving patients. Her grieving parents rushed in, only to be told that it is suicide. They begged to see her body, but they were refused. They wanted to hold her, to touch her, but were blocked. They waited time to mourn, but were pushed towards a hurried cremation. Imagine that. Your child's body is not yours to see. Just imagine it. Now, what connects these two stories? The body, the narrative, the very truth of death, all were seized by institutions. According to NCRB, National Crime Records Bureau organization, every year, more than 5.2 million medical malpractices cases are filed in India. 80% of medical error deaths are due to surgical errors. And who takes responsibility? Who takes accountability of that? And that brings us to a very profound idea in philosophy on which the conference is being conducted, that is thanatopolitics. Already covered from different aspects by Professor Bhaduri, moving from thanatopolitics to thanatopoiesis, as he mentioned, Freud's death drive, and Professor Shubhadeep's concept of how death is a new beginning. Death cloak mechanism he talked about, paradoxical nature of death. Moving on to the next slide, I have mentioned some basic explications of the thanatopolitics. Thanatopolitics, or the politics of death, finds deep roots in classical philosophical traditions. In Western philosophical traditions, like in Plato's dialogues like Republic, Theaetetus, Apology, Crito, Cratylus, and in Aristotle's De Metaphysica, death is not merely biological, but tied to soul's journey, purpose, and it is a virtue, reflecting a deeper ontological engagement with being and non-being, the tension between eros and thanatos. In the post-human paradigm, where human identity is decentered, death is reframed not as an end, but as part of an ongoing transformation beyond binary oppositions, reflected in works of Nietzsche, Husserl, Merleau-Ponty, Rorty, in different forms, focusing on non-dualistic ontological understanding of consciousness, dissolving rigid separations from life and death, self and other, enabling a politics that embraces mortality, interconnection, and becoming rather than denial or control. Now, the French thinker Michel Foucault in 1976 in History of Sexuality spoke of modern power as biopower. No longer the king's right to kill, but the state's power. I say it again, the state's power to make live and to let die. Some lives are nurtured, others are neglected. Who gets to decide who is going to get that ICU room? Who is going to decide that who will get the oxygen cylinders? Agamben in 1995 took this idea further. He argued that in modern states, death itself is political. It is not a biological phenomena. It is a decision taken by the institutions, by the government. They are political choices. Mbembe in 2003 sharpened the point: if thanatopolitics is governance of the dying, then necropolitics is the politics of the dead. Think of the unclaimed COVID bodies pushed into mass cremations. Think of corpses that were withheld until hospital bills were cleared, they were paid. That is definitely necropolitics in action, in practice. Now, friends, let me take you to a very familiar place, that is the intensive care unit, the ICU. The liminal space between life and death, where machines beep, nurses rush, doors swing shut, and yet for the person lying inside, what is absent is as loud as what is present. The absence of touch, of family, of familiar voices. Now that is what I called medicalized dying. With the rise of modern medicine and urban hospitals, more Indians now die under fluorescent lights rather than open skies, rather than at their homes. And while medicine has served countless lives, it has also created a new script for death. One written not in love, but in protocols, in paperworks, and in billing counters. Think of ICU rules. In hospitals, families are not allowed to meet their people, maybe for a minute, in the entire day. And what happens? People spend their final hours of their life, the final days of their life, in quarantine of dying, sealed away from the people they love. Now, let's take an example. A daughter is wanting to whisper some words, some mantras, some chants in the ear of her father when he is on his deathbed. The mantras like, Mano mrityurya, idam jagat striyam, nayat patithite, subhesha jai. Let not death seize this one from this world. Lead him rather on the paths of healing. Taken from Rigveda, 10th Mandala, 59th Shloka. Now tradition, the Indian tradition, tells about our sacred duties. But hospitals tells us, no visiting hours, they are over. So is this really care? Or this is the alienation of life? Then comes bureaucracy. Hospitals withhold bodies on ventilators unnecessarily, even if the person is dead, for 2 days, 3 days. Why? Just to inflate bills. Imagine the cruelty done to the body. Not yet released for the cremation, but already an item, an object to be fitted on your invoice, on your bills. 80% of Indian healthcare is privatized, paid out of pocket. Families pour their savings into final treatments of their loved ones, and a loved one's last chapter becomes the beginning of a family's financial ruin. And they also keep the body for unnecessarily longer period of times, which is a concept given by Indian ethicist Gush Sahani and Money, which he names as the unnecessarily prolonged death. Now, when a family steps into an ICU, they do not just enter a hospital ward, they cross a border into a foreign land. Now, a post-human feminist philosopher, Miranda Fricker, she calls it epistemic injustice, the wrong done to someone in their very capacity as a knower. In simple words, it happens when what you say, what you feel, what you know in your bones is dismissed. Just because you are not the expert in the room, just because you are not a doctor, doesn't mean that you don't know anything, right? You know your father, you knew your mother. You knew what they like, what they don't like, what they are scared of. So think of a family standing by the bed of their dying father. They have lived with him for decades. They know his fears, his rhythms. They nod along as terms like inotropes and prognosis guarded. Now they sense something is wrong. They know something is wrong. The doctors are not telling you something right. The anesthesia might be risky. The aggressive treatment might be cruel, but they swallow their doubts because surely the doctor knows the best. Only later do they learn that their instincts were right. What happened there, that is what Miranda Fricker calls testimonial injustice. Now, because of time constraints, I'll just rush it up a little bit. So this is where I connect it with the ethics of care, which I also got the opportunity to teach this paper this semester to the students, where we are discussing with different concepts like the concept of Voice of Care by Carol Gilligan. In her book, In a Different Voice, mentions that morality, rules, justice is not just about how things are given to you, but it's also about interrelationships by responsibility, responsiveness. Then we have like the concepts given by Nell Noddings of engrossment, emotional displacement, confirmation. Milton Meroff gives the name of care in the form of patience, in the form of knowing, trust, humility, hope. And thus, in Indian context, we see all these things. In the Western, where thinkers are talking about thanatopolitics, the politics of dying, the Upanishads, like in the Katha Upanishad, we find na jayate mriyate va kadachin na hayante hanyamane sharirya. The soul is never born, nor does it ever die. It is not slain when the body is slain. Tattvamasi, aham brahmasmi. The Atman is eternal, moving through sansara, thy cycle of the birth and rebirth. So, along the bedside, the families do not come with machines. They come with mantras, with tulsi leaves, with Ganga Jal, with words like Ram Naam Satya Hai. The body is laid upon the earth close to the mother. And the priest ties the sacred thread. They change their clothes. They change everything. They sit close to them. They tell them how that person was important for them. And that is a good death. That is a good death. So the law too has evolved now. We see certain changes, like in the Aruna Schonbock's case, the passive euthanasia was permitted but buried under impossible procedures. In 2018, the Supreme Court declared that the right to die with dignity flows from Article 21, the right to life itself. So what does that mean? It means that the end of life care is very important, and let our hospitals begin with stories, not just sheets of data. Let our courts remember that autonomy does not erase relations. Relationships care, empathy, they are very important. Let every dead body, let every dead being be cared for their journey ahead. We should pray for them, and the hospitals, the staff, the institutions should have more empathy and should more embrace it. So at the end, so there was this another Kerala model where they inculcated palliative care and care in taking care of the dead ones, which is very successful. So on the basis of this, I would just like to conclude my presentation saying that India must reimagine death care, and instead of just putting the dead ones and the dying, bounding them by wires, bills, and bureaucratic system, a regime of disconnection, we should focus on the politics of compassion, the karuna Rajniti, the place that dignity of the dying is at the center of everything. So daya dharma ka mool hai, paap mool abhiman. Compassion is the root of dharma, and pride is the root of sin. So this means laws that forbid hospitals from holding bodies, it means living wills and advance directives already upheld by the Supreme Court must be honored with clarity and with care. So thank you so much. And I would just like to say that no patient should die in a fog of confusion, and no family should live with the bitterness of being unheard. The right to die with dignity begins with the right to be respected as a knower. So instead, in fact, people should also, put some time, give some, should research some more about the kind of disease that we have in society, the kind of care we should give in a particular kind of disease. We should know the kind of hospitals, we should know our doctors, so that the institution should not feel that they are not knowers, let them not know a lot of things. If we are aware, if we are more concerned about the things that are going on, then that puts us in a position of epistemic justice as well, okay, which is focused more by post-human feminist philosophers a lot. So thank you so much, and I wish everybody should enjoy the time that has been given to us on this earth and should die with dignity. Thank you so much.